screens, it's a plot to drop the IQ. Fighting amongst each other over rumors that don't like you. Prefer us trapped in melancholy with the wood ones of holly. Suggestions that obliterate to camouflage the folly. Attempted mental robbery, executed sloppily. The pomp precede this mockery and walk the talk with me. Put the hands up to touch the Akasha, cause you know deep down there's something bigger than your wallet.
Sweet eternal balance of all that is good, true, and beautiful, friends. Welcome back to Rogue Soul, where tonight we're talking about Rasputin. We're talking about Rasputin because I keep seeing, him in mostly in popular culture, media, movies. I can't even remember. You probably know which one that I'm forgetting that his character was in somewhat recently. But, it was just weird for me because I realized that I thought he was just like Rip Van Winkle. I mean, they're like the same person in my mind. So I don't know, they're bearded European, men of mythological stature. One of them, I don't know, maybe Rip Van Winkle does have some basis in reality, but Rasputin definitely does. Real guy, not that long ago. So, I'm a history I'm a history person, but there's things like that just go right past me. And I apparently just only saw him in fictional movies and stuff. So I just thought he was like a fictional character. And maybe it's similar to the phenomenon of Merlin. There's people who are like, oh, Merlin wasn't real at all. He's just this fictional sort of character archetype. And others are like, oh no, Merlin was so real. And there's even record of it. And there's many characters like that throughout history. Rasputin, however, is there's no question about whether or not he actually really was. He's just of a mythological stature because he's got the legendary status around him. His aura is full of this legendary status. So people use that. They tap into that. Makes sense why he's in all sorts of comics and movies and things like this. Rasputin. So we're going to get into a little bit of Rasputin today. Thanks for, by the way, your patience. Yesterday I wasn't able to release an episode, or do a live stream or anything. So here I am with what was going to be yesterday and doing it today. And so thanks for understanding that. It's nothing really more than it just didn't work out. So no big deal. But we'll have everything else as usual. The winning report will be this Thursday as usual. Any bonus episodes will come out as usual. And Athen Commenti's returning either this coming week or the week after, but before January's out, we're going to do that yearly astrological overview. He does the true sidereal astrology. He's super insightful about that. And I also just love true sidereal as separate from sidereal Vedic or tropical astrology. So I love to get that. You can find the rest of those types of astrological previews, right? Looks ahead and whatnot from all over the place. And most of them will agree with each other. But you can only get the true sidereal essentially from him. There's a few other people who are technically trained in true sidereal astrology, a little bit harder to find. So that'll be fun. As always, you might then become interested in doing your own natal chart through true sidereal astrology and getting any readings. And if so, I always would love for you to go to roguesoul.org. All of the stuff I do is here, and I have my own readings and things to offer you as well. But if you do get interested in that true sidereal, go to the favorite things tab and scroll down. Organic Hemp Society, amazing CBD, high quality, also supports veterans and others in need. Every bottle you buy goes free to someone in need. But true sidereal astrology here with Athen Commenti. If you click on this link, it actually supports the show, supports my work, and supports what I do. And so I appreciate that. So lots of good stuff here. Chemical Free Body, Tim James, the Aqua Cure, George Weissman. All of these are things that I use myself, people who I believe in, products I believe in, and that importantly support your health. So they're not just random things. These are all things that support your health and the health and wellness of the world. So I like to support those. I love when I get a little affiliate boost from those links. Thank you for using those links on the favorite things tab to support the show. And again, while you're here at roguesoul.org, you check out the books, the fictional trilogy. I've been reading a lot of fiction lately. I just go through, I'll do nonfiction for a year and a half, and it's all I want. And I would not enjoy a fictional, novel. And then all of a sudden I'm on a fiction. bent, and then I go for months and months and I'm just reading fiction. And then sometimes I'm reading like 4 things at once, and I've got some nonfiction and some fiction mixed in, and I just flip back and forth. Like, that's my reading life. So if you want some nonfiction, I've got the channeled inspirational messages here through the key of transformational healing, and all endings are beginnings. If you want some fiction, do the trilogy. Oh my God, it's such a great story. I love it. I love it too when people buy it for their friends. Once they read it, and they're like, you have to read this. That's like the best support and the best compliment I could get. So thank you all who've read. And of course, also on roguesoul.org, you can schedule with me one-on-one. The 2026 tarot reading still going on for the rest of the month. Get your look ahead for the year. Spirit guides, channeling sessions, sound healing, attunement sessions, regular tarot, past life readings. We can just talk one-on-one when I do that too. I support people on spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical goals and needs, teaching and otherwise. Lightning oracles every first and third Tuesday. You can get your message from your guide or ally who comes through for you. You can always do a just one-off blessing, or choose a journey, a longer commitment. Get a lot of sessions packed up at once. Commit to your long-term growth. All of that's there at roguesoul.org. One more thing while we're here, you'll notice perhaps on the front page, the dream walking is back. Dream walking is the next class. I just did a sort of cycle. I did heart-centered healing back in, I don't know, November, October, something. And then we did the money package class for those people who, anyone really. So money package class is great for anyone. But it's a little bit geared towards people who might, go into business for themselves, especially as healers or spiritual workers. And then we did and are doing the sound healing class, which is much more profound than I think people think it is. And pretty much guarantee you there's no class like any of those anywhere in the world. And you could read the reviews from any of those classes here on the site. The Dreamwalking class is the only class that has no reviews, because at the time I didn't even think of having people leave reviews on the site. I just got their reviews in other ways. So they're plenty great, but you can't read them on the site, which is kind of annoying. This time around, I'll have people maybe go and leave a review on the site. But Dreamwalking is back. Dreamwalking back by popular demand. This class enables you to use your dreams as a spiritual channel to do pretty incredible things. And people really believe, I think, that there's people who think they don't dream, which is bullshit. There's people who've taken this class who said they don't dream, who ended the class dreaming regularly, because there's ways to dream. If you don't remember them, there's ways to remember your dreams. And everyone dreams, whether you like it or not. And then, there's people who think, well, yeah, I dream, but dreams are kind of silly, just noise that happens. Oh, no, they're not. And anybody, any human being can empower themselves to have dreams and use their dreams to accomplish spiritual tasks, to know anything they need to know, to gain insight into anything they need to gain insight into. And the people who take this class, it changes their life. So very excited to be offering this again. Coming up in February, we're going to do Sundays for the classes, and the practicums this time are going to be on Saturdays. So you're going to get 4 classes, 4 practicums. Super great deal. Right now, if you're signed up to my Substack or my email list, you got a coupon code as well. So you can take that class for even cheaper, significantly cheaper. And so it pays to be on the list. So I hope you are all going to come to Dreamwalking. I'll talk a little bit more about it probably in its own episode coming up here. But just wanted to let you know, in case you've been waiting. I know some of you have been waiting for it to come back around, and here it is. Dreamwalking is back. All right. Also go to rogueways.substack.com. That is where all my writing is. You see, Dreamwalking returns. You would have known. You would have already gotten the coupon code, already been in the class, good to go. But you also get all kinds of articles for free. You also get, tarot and more. You also get channeled messages as they come through if you're a paid supporter. A lot of stuff here on the Substack. It's an excellent way to be connected, as well as have fun and interesting things to read on spirituality, religion, philosophy, current events, and more. rogueways.substack.com. Thank you for your support there. By the way, if you are a paid subscriber, if you're going to become a paid subscriber, it's the best way to support everything I do. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So let's get into Rasputin. His name is actually Grigory Rasputin. The truth is that's apparently maybe not his name either, but we'll go with that for now. Grigory Rasputin. By the way, this is through Grokpedia. I'm sure some people hate that, just like some people hate Wikipedia. But I wanted to try it and see Grokpedia. So here we are, the other Spookopedia. Grigory Efimovich Rasputin, 1869 to 1916. So 20th century, he was still alive. This is the man who I thought was just a character, is actually a real guy. You guys might all be like, yeah, duh, everybody knows Rasputin. I have no idea how that just passed me right by. But here we are. He was a Russian peasant from Siberia, lacking formal education or monastic vows, positioned himself as a starets, a wandering holy man, and gained extraordinary access to the imperial family of Tsar Nicholas II. Through claims of spiritual insight and success in easing the suffering of the hemophiliac heir Alexei Nikolaevich Romanov. Born into rural poverty in Pokrovskoye on the Tura River, Rasputin experienced a religious awakening around 1894. So he would have been about 26 or so, it sounds 25. When that happened, his religious awakening. And again, they say religious here. Is it religious? Is it spiritual? I mean, maybe that's not the best word, but an awakening, we'll say, at least of a spiritual nature, prompting pilgrimages to holy sites and immersion in Orthodox mysticism. If you remember my somewhat recent episode a few months back on Orthodoxy, the Eastern Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox Church, that was something that I loved learning about, was just how mystical they are. I'm a mystic myself. Sometimes, I'm referred to myself as a shamanic spiritual healer and teacher. And another way I refer to myself is as a mystic. And so these are, I think, terms that matter. And so the Orthodox Church still has their mysticism intact, which essentially is just to say that they actually believe what the church ostensibly says they believe, but usually doesn't in modern days, which is that things like angels and demons actually exist. They're actually here, that they actually interact and interfere with humans, that you can actually communicate with saints and, beings who have passed on and, higher powers and whatnot, and that you should. That ritual matters, because ritual and the egregore of the ritual is something that helps get you aligned with the things that are non-corporeal or beyond the physical. That's what mysticism really is, right? Understanding that those things are real. And so I like the word too, because it at least has a little bit less likelihood to be used dismissively. Whereas spiritual doesn't. If somebody's like, oh, she's spiritual, or oh, he's spiritual, they can dismiss that like, what a kook, right? But if you're Orthodox or you're mystic, that's a little bit more acceptable to some people. So anyway, so it sounds like a spiritual awakening happening. He was a mystic anyway, and then he immersed himself in the Orthodox mysticism of the church. It says he later leveraged that association with orthodoxy and mysticism to cultivate a reputation for piety amid Russia's fin de siècle fascination with starets figures, which really is just this fascination with the mystical, the spiritual, people who seem to have, a brighter aura, a deeper connection or abilities, right? Psychic aspects and the like. This was all the rage. It wasn't just Russia. This was kind of like the entire, and I'll include Russia in the term Western world, especially around this time, was very into these types of things. It was sort of, right after his death, that time period where it started to become less and less fashionable. And then it started to become almost like suppressed, repressed, to be mystical, to be spiritual was bad. It was dangerous. It was demonic, right? So we got really, really kind of deep into our, Puritanism, right? This is like everything's scary if it's not just sitting in a church, like listening to a preacher. So yeah, that sort of reputation he got was both sort of religious and this sort of mystical, extra religious sort of energy people were fascinated with. It says by 1905, he introduced via aristocratic circles, he met the Tsarina Alexandra, whose desperation over Alexi's condition, exacerbated by ineffective medical interventions, made her receptive to Rasputin's calming presence and prayers, which coincided with temporary remissions in the boy's bleeding episodes, interpreted by the family as divine intervention rather than coincidental or psychosomatic. We always have to do it this way. This is the way that we pretend to be objective, as we're like, well, obviously it wasn't the prayers and it wasn't the mysticism. It was circumstantial and coincidental, and any rational person would know that. And it's like, but you don't actually know that. If you are actually an objective thinker, you'd have to admit, I don't actually know the cause of the boy's seeming remission at the time. And because it coincided with Rasputin and him arriving on the scene and whatever it is he may have done, I have to admit as a logical person that it is actually perhaps related to that. That is at least one potential truth, right? If you reject either outright, you're already in the camp of a biased thinker who is not therefore thinking. Bias precludes thought. So yeah, whatever happened, whatever you want to think happens, up to you. But they want you to think that it very obviously could never be anything spiritual because that doesn't exist, right? It says Rasputin's defining characteristics was his unorthodox blend of devout faith and personal failings, including heavy drinking, liaisons with women, which fueled scandals and pamphlets accusing him of debauchery, rituals, allegations, often amplified by political rivals, and later memoirs of dubious veracity, such as those of his assassin, Prince Felix Yusupov, but also rooted in verifiable episodes of public intoxication and moral lapses that clashed with his self-proclaimed holiness. Now, this is a funny thing because this happens a lot of the times too, where people will be like, well, you're not holy because you're not doing what I've decided is moral, which is pretty ridiculous if you think about it. If you really get down to it, you're like, you're not holy because I want you to be a different way than you are. That doesn't actually make sense. What is it to be holy? What is it to be mystical? What is it to be connected? It doesn't actually have anything to do necessarily with what society has deemed moral or immoral. What is moral or immoral does change a bit from time to time, right? At the root of it, we kind of have like a base morality that is pretty definable and doesn't ever really change. And C.S. Lewis is really good at describing that and defining the sort of difference between the changes that do happen and the things that are kind of like continual throughout most of human civilization and history. But for example, to get roaring drunk is neither spiritual nor non-spiritual. And you may reject that upon first impulse, but if you look closer at it, I don't think you will. There is nothing inherently wrong with being ridiculously drunk. Nothing inherently wrong with it. There is something that becomes much harder to justify if it is frequent or it is disrupting your ability to live a happy life, right? That's a different thing. But let's just say, and I don't know, I wasn't there, neither were you, and who knows what Rasputin actually did, but let's just say he got roaring drunk at a feast time. And he was out in public and it was just like, he was so trash and it was maybe hilarious, or maybe he like tripped over things, or maybe it was kind of crazy. That has nothing to do with whether or not he's spiritual at all, at all. Even if it was a little bit more regular than some people who accept that you could be roaring drunk and still deeply spiritual and mystical, except maybe even then it could be, okay, you're allowed to get drunk, dude. In fact, Chesterton, another really important spiritual philosopher, Christian philosopher specifically, talked about like, yeah, we should get drunk together. Yeah, we should get drunk and we should eat good food and we should sing and be merry because we are alive and we should celebrate being alive. And that's one of the things we can do that's really fun together, is get roaring drunk and just eat and just be merry. Laugh and play. This is one of the things we get to do. Again, not all the time, but at least sometimes, right? And I don't drink, and I'm not going to, but I have no problem with people doing that. I think it's very good for people to connect and to share food and drink together, and sometimes perhaps to be drunk together, especially in celebratory, feast-like social pro-social, positive ways. So I don't, does it matter if he got drunk? I mean, probably not. But again, if he was just a drunk all the time, if he was like abusive when he was drunk, if he just, right, like dropped all his morals when he was drunk, it's a different story. This doesn't necessarily seem what's going on. As they point out, a lot of his political rivals, or rather the political rivals of the Tsar and the family, the Romanovs, were maybe exacerbating some of this, or embellishing some of this, or making it seem other than it was, which is, of course, also almost always going to be the case with most people. And so, especially since the people who seem to have won eventually are those who were against the Romanovs, as famously slaughtered in those revolutions. And so, Rasputin, their guy, was maligned with them. And so the victors wrote the history. And so how is the history going to make them look? Well, probably as negative as possible, right? So we got to take all those things into account, in my opinion. His influence extended to advising Alexander on court appointments, war-related decisions during World War I, not through hypnotic control or direct policy dictation as myths suggest, but via trusted telegrams that reflected the Tsarina's own conservative instincts, thereby symbolizing the Romanovs' detachment from competent governance and eroding elite support for the autocracy. Oh, that's a complicated sentence full of things that don't necessarily go together. Maybe he had some kind of hypnotic influence. Maybe there are people who have what has been described as like animal magnetism, right? And then we correlate that with hypnotic ability. And then again, if you have a strong aura, if you've ever met anyone that just comes into a room and like the whole room is affected, like this is someone with a strong aura, whether you see auras or not, or really believe, whatever, it doesn't matter. So if he has something like that, and he has this sort of magnetism, and he has a profound faith, which a lot of people who go through any kind of spiritual or religious awakening have, various types of faith, but a strong faith. People with strong faith and conviction itself are often quite influential. They're quite able to, influence people. So it doesn't have to be like that he magically went in and like did dark magic and hypnotized and like put ideas in people's heads for him to have been quite influential and perhaps almost close to, or maybe even a hypnotic sort of way. That is a thing that occurs. If you've never seen people use NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, to talk to someone and to then convince them of something, you don't know how it can be. Like it can be crazier than you think. There's this somewhat famous example of, I think it was Ricky Gervais talking to, God, I forget his name, but you might remember, or be able to go find it easily. And he's a sort of magician, sleight of hand psychologist, neuro-linguistic programming specialist. And he's talking to him, he says, write down the Christmas present you got when you were 7 or something, whatever age. And he writes it down, he puts it in his pocket. And then as he's talking to him, whatever he does, he never mentions the Christmas present he did actually get. And he never mentions the Christmas present he ends up saying he got, which is totally different than the one he actually got. And remember, he just wrote it down, put it in his pocket, and then talked to this guy all in one, even, smooth, no pauses or anything. So it was fresh in his mind. And let's just say it was a blue bicycle or something that he got. And then he's talking to this guy for like 2 minutes, 3 minutes, not very long. The guy just does certain things, hand motions, certain words, whatever it is that he knows how to do it. And then he says, so tell me again, what was that present that you got when you were 7? And Ricky Gervais says something like, a yellow ball. And he's like, really? Are you sure? And he's like, yeah, I can see it. I can see it. I'm like, yeah, of course I'm sure. I just wrote it in my pocket. And he pulls out the thing he wrote in his pocket, and it's like blue bicycle. And he's like mind blown. He's like, what? Like, how did that even happen? Well, that's neuro-linguistic programming. That's the ability we have to suggest things in such a subtle way, but such a confident way, with the right energy, with the right hand motion, right? With the right eye contact, that people think they know. And really, they're like receiving this new program, this new program. So it's called programming, neuro-linguistic, meaning brain or mind, and words programming you. So was Rasputin doing some form of that, even unintentionally? Even before we called it neuro-linguistic programming, people were doing it. right? The fast talkers, the change makers that get away with like $100 and all they gave you was 5 or whatever. Like those people, like people have been using it before it had a name. So was he doing that? Yeah, probably. It sounds like it. You don't build up a legendary mythical status like this without having that sort of potential, at least. So they also, just said like this shows the Romanovs' detachment from competent governance. Maybe. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a big like Romanov expert. I'm not an apologist for the Romanovs. I'm not also against them. There's some sort of something romantic almost in imagining like princesses and princes and, the ruling class of a certain era. And it's, but it's also, you think about like the people in the streets starving and you're like, well, this is not so romantic, right? So for or against, I would have to know so much more about it to even have a stance on it. But is it detached from competent governance to have like a trusted person, right? Who you align with their ideas and ideals, right? And that you have a concept, perhaps even that, there's a right way to do things and there's the just right way to do things. And then there's the spiritual ideals we want to uphold. And this guy somehow, contains them all and is a good advisor. I trust him. Does that make you incompetent? No, I don't think so. So to connect this to that, I mean, you can do it. I just don't know. You don't need to, right? You're just be like, yeah, they had an advisor and then they were overthrown. More factual, less editorializing. But the supposed elites were less likely to support the autocracy as time went on, and that led to support in the revolution. So this proximity to power, it says on Grokkopedia, amid military failures and domestic unrest, branded Rasputin a baleful force, culminating in his murder in December 1916. Amid military failures and domestic unrest, which I'll say had nothing really to do with him, but they decided to take him out. You have to see someone as a real threat to target them and take them out. So they both like diminish, oh, he didn't actually have any abilities and he's just a guy and he's kind of a drunkard and a piece of crap, and like whatever, he's just a faker or something. And these people were all just like, deeply like I don't know, like immersed in their elite, like whatever. And they were out of touch and they just like believed this guy while they were losing all their power and control and whatever. Well, no, I mean, it can't have been that way if you chose to target him for removal. Something he was doing was actually effective, or else you wouldn't. So it just adds to his myth and legend. Grokkopedia is trying to be really objective. I don't know, but you don't target a person for the type of assassination this guy got unless there's something about him that matters. So there's all kinds of things you could go with that. Like, do they have scryers? They're looking into the future. And they're like, if we don't take him out, they stay in power. We can't get through the revolution without him. Maybe it's just that he's like a figure so that he represents something and they're trying to take that out because that's effective for them. Even if he's not especially effective against them, he might have just represented the sort of decadence of the elite class, the ruling class, the Tsarinas and Tsarovs or whatever, the Romanovs. And so to take him out was just sort of a win that the people could see and notice. There's also that. So his murder occurred 1916, a conspiracy of nobles who shot him multiple times before dumping his body in the river, an act confirmed by autopsy evidence of gunshot wounds as the primary cause of death, rather than exaggerated tales of poison, resistance, or superhuman endurance. Again, I think they actually downplay what actually happened. You're welcome to, we'll get more into it in a minute, and you'll see whether you think it is somewhat superhuman or somewhat, beyond expectation. And what actually happened. Some people say, no, he survived even the river and he was still alive after this. And other people were like, well, no, they had his body. They did an autopsy. And who knows? It's a long time ago, right? His legacy endures as a cautionary emblem of how personal charisma and perceived mysticism can destabilize fragile institutions with modern scholarship emphasizing primary documents over sensationalized narratives to reveal a man whose real sway arose from the Tsarina's vulnerabilities, not occult mastery. Which, like, again, as though they could know looking back. And you're like, primary documents, sure. Just because you can show that she was vulnerable and emotional doesn't mean that he didn't also have some sort of energy or ability. Or even if he was just a spiritual person who was a really good friend and a great advisor, right? That doesn't just mean that she's like some dumb piece of shit who only knows how to like cry and is naive and like gives in to influence. You know what I mean? Like, this type of editorializing is always so annoying. So that's sort of the official story on Rasputin. This author is interesting. They did a 3-part Rasputin dive on Medium. This is the Writrix, Beyond Myth and Madness, uncovering the lesser known truths about Russia's most controversial spiritual figure. So this person was interested as a child, loving this sort of movie, Nicholas and Alexandra, a 3-hour cinematic extravaganza depicting the love story between the last Tsar of Russia, Nicholas II, and his wife, German-born Alexandra. It sparked her fascination with this, the Romanovs and this final Tsar of Russia, but also Rasputin, the mad monk, he was called. She says it still intrigues her today. So rather than going over the same tired story, she tries to hone in on some things that less often are talked about or less people know. So his influence over the royal family, his debauched lifestyle, his exploits, she said, led to his brutal assassination, an event that further destabilized the already fragile Russian monarchy and resulted in 2 Russian revolutions in 1917. But was he a holy healer or a cunning con man? Or does the truth lie somewhere in between? So she talks about not so holy nickname. She says, surprise, Rasputin wasn't actually his real name. Turns out Rasputin was more like a nickname and not a very flattering one. And this is interesting because this is also true of Jesus. Jesus is a title. Christ is a title. The real name of the being that represented the Christ consciousness at that time was not Jesus or Christ. And so people will say things like, there's not even records that Jesus existed. And it's like, well, there are actually, and actually they're worldwide, which is very interesting. But not under the name Jesus Christ, because it's not a name. It's like saying there's no records that President, Vice Secretary, President ever existed. And you're like, well, yeah, because that's not a name. But people don't know that, So Rasputin is similar, which is interesting. Not that he's similar to Jesus necessarily, right? But just in that way. In Russian, it says it means something like debauched one. So his name directly references his debauchery, which is awesome. Like, you're so debaucherous that people just called you the debauched one. The wild stories that followed him around gave him this name. His real name was Novyk. Novykh. Much less dramatic, she says, don't you think? She also talks about the strange, sweet world of the Russian mad monk. Rasputin was a self-proclaimed prophet, claimed he had predicted the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo. But did you know he also claimed to be able to predict the price of bread? Imagine a baker with that skill. Maybe not as impressive as foretelling an event that plunged the world into war, but definitely more practical in famine-riddled imperial Russia. Rasputin wasn't just a holy man, he was a foodie. He loved indulging in delicious food, especially sweets and cakes. So remember, he made predictions and they were often true, allegedly, which is a part of why that family trusted him, right? Because when you can seem to know the future and be right often enough, some people will have to pay attention. So here's another thing where it's like, it's not just being stupid or naive, or vulnerable. It's not just that he's like some kind of liar or something trying to take advantage. It's like he actually does seem to have had some sorts of higher level abilities. And then he was a foodie. He liked wine a lot. He indulged in food. This actually did play a role in his death, but we'll get there. He loved sugar cubes, and not just for their sweetness. He actually believed they possessed magical properties. Interestingly, they do. Any crystal does. So sugar, salt, any crystal that you can find. And then when it's also pressed into sacred geometry, which by the way, a cube is as simple as it is also sacred geometry. So he's not wrong. It's pretty interesting. This is just a taste, she says, of the lesser known Rasputin. Rasputin's women, from Tsarina to princesses. There's no doubt that Rasputin loved women, and even as a lowly peasant in Siberia, he was never short of female company. His best, most impressive pickup line was the promise that all of the woman's sins would be cleansed if she slept with him. By all accounts, it worked. How would you know? What's hilarious to me about this is that hippie men are still doing that today. They're like, I could show you God. I could bring you in connection. We're going to have this Kundalini, girl. Let's do it. And stupid girls are like, yeah. And it's just a guy, getting in your pants. So, good on him. He got game. It worked. It's fair. It says, but it's also important to establish that Rasputin was, by all accounts, a devoted husband and father to his children. So interestingly, despite that, he apparently was doing a lot of ladies. His wife and children didn't think him the worst for it. Very fascinating. Here he is with mostly women, a few men. This isn't like a sex party. This is just showing, his fan base at one moment in time. But a lot of ladies, and they're all very close to him and some touching him. So very charismatic guy. Alexandra, the Tsarina, the most famous and influential woman in Rasputin's life, was the Tsarina Alexandra. Rumors and gossip abounded about the nature of their relationship, but one thing is certain: it was not a sexual one, but a cerebral and spiritual one. Thank you for someone for acknowledging that. Well, it seemed obvious to me, even not knowing much about this case. Alexandra was deeply in love with her husband, Tsar Nicholas II. In an era of arranged marriages, the couple fell in love at first sight and remained so until their tragic deaths in 1918. Alexandra found Rasputin's company refreshing compared to the stuffy court. Right? And again, that's like pretty normal. You grow up around all these like maneuvering, machinating, like just thieves and criminals that are dressed in finery and, just all in the court, like plotting against each other. And then you meet this refreshingly honest man who's like, yep, got a wife and I'll fuck. Like, just like not trying to hide who he is or anything. And he's intellectual and he's spiritual and he's maybe very trustworthy. Like, yeah, you would be, right? So it makes sense. Alexandra found Rasputin's company refreshing compared to I said that. She shared a fascination with the mystical, and Rasputin's ability to ease Alexei's hemophilia sufferings earned him the Tsarina's unwavering trust and gratitude. This closeness to the royal family, especially Alexandra, granted him immense influence. So again, whatever actually happened, the kid actually did get better from his hemophilia, and it was in connection with Rasputin appearing at least on the scene. What did he actually do? Who knows? The people who cannot accept that something mystical could ever happen can't read this story correctly. If you are committed to the bias that there is nothing beyond what you call the materialist and the physical, which is a very limited understanding of the materialist and physical, then you can't ever get in touch with things like this that maybe actually were mystical, beyond the physical. We might call it miraculous. Anna Vyrubova, the Tsarina's confidant. Anna was a close friend and confidant of Alexandra. They shared a deep friendship based on mutual trust and a shared interest in mysticism. This trust gave Vyrubova significant influence over the Tsarina. Vyrubova became a fervent believer in Rasputin's mystical abilities. She saw him as a potential savior for Alexei and a source of spiritual guidance for the Tsarina. Convinced by his powers, she actively promoted Rasputin at court. Was she ever Rasputin's mistress? There's no evidence of this. Certainly their close friendship and shared connection with the Tsarina, coupled with the secrecy associated with Rasputin's interactions with women, was seized upon by contemporary newspapers that eagerly sensationalized and exaggerated the nature of their relationship. So maybe they did have sexual relations, but we just don't know. But definitely it was, alleged because it makes him look bad. Milika and Anastasia, the mystical princesses. Lesser known, but equally intriguing, are these Montenegrin princesses. They were known to dabble in fortune-telling, spiritualism, and other esoteric practices. This fascination with the supernatural is what ultimately led them to Rasputin. According to an article in a 1928 newspaper, the two sisters were staying at the hostel of Monastery of St. Michael in the early 1900s while on a pilgrimage in Kiev when they noticed a simple pilgrim chopping wood in the yard, apparently to earn his keep. It was none other than Rasputin, returning from his second pilgrimage to Jerusalem. A conversation started between the threesome, and Rasputin informed the ladies that he could cure all sorts of diseases, foretell the future, and avert misfortune. The sisters were intrigued, believing they had found the miracle worker they were looking for to introduce to the royal court at St. Petersburg. At that time, Alexei's illness was not known by the public, so the two sisters told Rasputin about it, and he replied that he could cure it. The rest is history. The princesses arranged for him to meet the Tsar and Tsarina. This proved to be a turning point in Rasputin's life, granting him access to the royal family, securing the princesses an influential role at the Russian court. The murder of Rasputin's mistress. This person found an interesting article from 1934 with the headline, Rasputin's mistress found murdered. This article describes how a beautiful Russian woman, at one time the mistress of Rasputin and a friend of Tsar Nicholas II, had been found murdered by the roadside just outside the city of Athens. When the police began to probe the dead woman's past, they discovered she was likely the victim of a political execution. It seems that when the revolution broke out, she fell under the spell of Lenin, then set herself to seduce Alexander Kerensky, the first president of the Republic. The article surmises that she later betrayed Kerensky to Lenin and his Bolshevik revolutionaries. The writer believed that her death was the result of her being, quote, indiscreet enough to declare her intention of publishing what she knew of the Russian dictators. So she was once the mistress of Rasputin and later used her sexual wiles in order to double-cross the new republic with the communists, who would then overthrow. So fascinating. Very interesting. Oh, the tangled webs we weave, right? Family, faith, and a circus bear. Maria Rasputin. Believe it or not, the Australian Women's Weekly interviewed his daughter, Maria Rasputin, in 1933. She recalls her father was very religious. Quote, he was one of those human beings who sees God's will in everything that happens, every single minute of life. She was also aware of Rasputin's magnetic mysticism. She called it a certain mysterious influence that was palpable. When he took me on his knee and looked at me, at those instants, it was as if I felt his look penetrating into my head and knew it would be impossible for me to turn my eyes away from him as long as he was keeping his eyes on me like that. So like I said, there's this magnetism, there's this influence, there's this potential that a lot of people have. And he may have, and sounds like he did actually have that. That's not a negative thing, by the way. It's just like anything. It's neutral. You could use it for good. You could use it for evil. It's up to you, right? Did he? It's up to you to decide, too. What is good and evil to you? And was he good or evil? Seems like an okay guy to me so far. Maria describes their family life in Pokrovsky, Siberia, as quiet, and her mother as a sweet woman who always tried to do as much good for us as was possible for her. Very sweet. She told the interviewer that her father was very strict and insisted his family attend church for 2 hours each on Saturdays and Sundays. They all had to stand still without moving. Despite everything, Maria insists that while her youth was made hard by her father, she adored him. In my admiration and esteem for him, I was not alone. Also, my sister and brother adored him. Yeah, there's this idea, I don't know why, that like if you're strict, your kids won't like you. Like, kids actually like structure. They like to know that you love them enough to care about what they do and don't do. You know, if you beat them, that's a different story. But if you just have standards and expectations and you also are loving, that's like the best combination you could possibly have. So strictness is not a bad thing. So it's a weird that she had to clarify even. Yeah, he was strict, but we loved him. Like, yeah, most kids do. When Lenin and the Bolsheviks staged the Second Russian Revolution in November 1917, Maria and her family were at significant risk, given their father's controversial reputation and close ties to the Tsarist regime. Fortunately, his children managed to escape from Russia before the Bolsheviks could capture them, and Maria eventually settled in the United States, married, and raised a family. And here's another article about her from the US. Rasputin's daughter mauled by a circus bear. So Marie Rasputin, daughter of Russia's Black Monk. So he's called the Mad Monk and the Black Monk, which are both interesting. And an animal trainer in the Hagenbach Wallace Circus was clawed by a bear in the arena at Indiana. 12 stitches were required to close wounds on her right arm and left leg. It is expected she'll recover. In the arena were lions, tigers, leopards, pumas, and 3 bears. One of the bears, which does a rollover act, in some manner struck the young woman during this routine and knocked her down. The animal immediately sprang upon her and began mauling her. 2 assistants rushed to her aid and succeeded in rescuing her from the animals. Well, that's very lucky. And here she is, and she has, kind of the intense look that he seemed to have in his pictures too. Her eyes are quite vivid with energy. So I don't know that she ever proclaimed herself as a mystic or anything, but she seems to have something like the father. Rasputin's brothers. In 1936, a newspaper reported that a brother of Grigory Rasputin was killed by a police car at Tomsk. He had been a professional beggar. The document from Rasputin on private notepaper from the Winter Palace was found in his pocket. He was an aged tramp, they said, and he sought admission to a refuge. He's in the hospital. And when Russian immigrants in the refuge learned his name, they set on him and beat him. That's wild. So people hated him enough post-revolution that they hated anyone who was connected to him. Seems intense. He's just a dude, what did he do to you? Nothing. Very intense. But they associate him with so they associate him with the as I said, the great indulgence of this sort of upper class and, the negligence to the needs of the lower classes. And so he's just a symbol, really. It's not him that they hate. So here's some of his controversial medical miracles by the same author. Of course, Alexei, the bleeding prince, was seemingly cured. And so he was the only male heir, right? So it would have been really important. He was frail. He couldn't play because of his blood disease, could make him bleed out if he got a little cut and all of this. So they worried about him. There was no effective treatment or nothing that was being done was helping. Internal bleeding could have happened, which would have been impossible to detect almost. So they were very worried. So then Rasputin shows up with his healing power. He offered comfort and emotional support to the Tsarevich, leading the Tsarina to believe his presence had a mystical healing effect. I mean, it does. This is the thing that's so interesting. People have to dismiss it. I don't know why. But they'll say things like, oh, well, that's just a placebo. That person just believed they were going to be healed, so they were. And I'm like, well, does that not a miracle to you? Are you retarded? Why does that make it not important to you? What about that means that it isn't amazing? And if this person is the thing that has the ability to make you believe and heal yourself, isn't that still amazing? Isn't that person still very helpful? People will ask me, they're like, you talk about, you do these healings, and then some people have these miraculous transformations. And they were my favorite one of them was a woman's hand was like a claw. I didn't even actually know that when we went into the healing. I never am like, I'm going to heal your anything. I'm just like, we'll do a healing session. We'll see what happens. Right. And at the end of it, her hand opened and was able to open and move for the first time in years and years and years after that healing session. And I'll share this sometimes just so people understand that real things happen when you do these sessions. And it's not the same it's different for everyone, but intense things happen at the spiritual level, at the emotional level, at the mental level, and at the physical level. And the physical ones are the most, amazing to a lot of people because that's where you can see, right? You can measure and you can touch, you can say, wow, that actually is real, right? And the other ones are maybe interpretive or, subjective. And so it's harder to say. So I get that. It's actually true, though, that the physical is like the least miraculous of those levels of being and healing. But anyways, that's one of my favorites, right? And then I'll have people who say, like, well, do you think that that's just because they believed they could heal and so they did? And I'm like, well, I wouldn't put just in there, but yes, that is definitely part of it. If you came into this healing session with the knowing that it couldn't possibly heal you, you would not heal nearly as much as you could if you believed it. So is it just the belief? No. Does the belief help? Of course. Just like in medical trials, where if you believe you're being helped, the treatment you get, no matter how effective we think it is or isn't, is much more likely to actually help. It's just the same thing. So when people say that, like, well, it was placebo, it was just their belief, like, oh, good. Like, great, that's a miracle. You're stupid. All right. They also talk about, is it hypnosis? Did hypnosis help? Again, if so, great. Is there something wrong with that? No, hypnosis has been shown to be effective. Just like another part. So you've got the placebo, help yourself with it, do it, right? Believe in the things you're doing so that they help you more. Then if you want to, if you can get hypnotized, or you can hypnotize yourself. It's what we call meditation. And you could go into meditation and be healing yourself, which is what I actually am trying to get everyone to do. Because I love working with you. I would love it way more if you just do it for yourself. Right? That's the goal. Hypnosis is good too. Does that mean that he's a fraud? No, it means he's crazy good at what he's doing. Super effective. And that's why he can say, I heal diseases, because he goes in and does all of the above. I'm going to help you calm down. I'm going to help you increase your faith in your ability to heal. I'm going to help you hypnotize yourself so that you can receive all of that. And by the way, that also is what allows higher level spiritual forces and beings to come through and assist you too. And miracles can occur. So Alexei believed that this man could heal him. I mean, his adults are telling him, yeah, this guy can heal you. He's telling you, yeah, I can heal you. You're a kid. It's actually easiest for kids to heal sometimes. They don't have all the preconceived garbage that we have blocking us up. So, of course, there's conspiracy theories that Rasputin staged some of the bleeds from the kid. And I don't know why. I don't know. They're saying that like Anna and other people like faked the hemophilia so that they could say that Rasputin healed it, so that they could pretend that he was healed. I mean, I don't know. Sure, maybe. Who can know? Why would you? I don't know. I guess you have your reasons. So there's that. That's interesting, right? And then in this last and final installment, this author is writing about the riddle of Rasputin, talking about his assassination. So wrongly or rightly, she says, this remark, which is something you may have heard before, reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. Has been attributed to the famous author Mark Twain, but it could just as easily have been uttered by Grigory Rasputin. One of Rasputin's most enduring legacies is the story of his violent death in 1916, which might be more aptly titled The Man Who Would Not Die. So Rasputin first felt the icy hands of death by assassination in 1914. He escaped. As he left the family home in Pokrovskoye to attend church, he saw a woman on her knees waiting on the threshold, her face muffled in a shawl. Rasputin was used to seeing people supplicating themselves in this manner and asked what she wanted of him. The woman's only reply was to plunge a large kitchen knife into his belly. Rasputin cried out and fell to the ground. This is the other thing. People will be like, oh, if he can see the future, why didn't he see this? Well, there's a lot of things you don't see, even if you do see the future from time to time. I'll be the first to tell you. I have been shown many, many things that did come true in the future. Some that didn't or haven't yet. We'll see. There's still time yet, right? And there's plenty of things I didn't see. And you're not supposed to know everything, or else what would be even the point of being alive? But, a lot of people just, for some reason, like that's their thing. Oh, if you don't see everything, then none of it matters. Like, so you can make like hundreds of predictions and they all come true. But because you couldn't predict every single moment of every single day, then therefore you're not special or you don't have a gift or what? That doesn't even make sense. So, anyways, this woman stabbed him in the belly. A waiting crowd rushed towards him, picked him up, detained a woman who replied calmly she had no intention of running away and that she knew what she had done and was prepared to answer all questions and appear before the magistrate. It was Guseva, the woman. That's her name. And she first became obsessed with Rasputin after one of his sermons in Saratov, her hometown. According to a newspaper article, being young and pretty, she was seduced by Rasputin way back then. And as he did with many of his women, he promised to cleanse her of her sins, but, quote, that it was only by means of a complete union with himself that she could be saved and her sins forgiven. It is quite the pickup line. And it was apparently effective. Madly infatuated, the young woman gave herself completely to Rasputin, losing everything in the process, her home, her children, her husband, and her family because of the fascination which he had exercised over her. Like, this woman has no responsibility for herself. She's just a tool blowing in the wind, and Rasputin used her, and then everything that happens to her now is her fault. Like, she didn't also choose to cheat on her husband, abandon her children to become fascinated with this guy and move on. Like, sure, maybe he's a dick for seducing women or whatever. You want to think that, that's totally fine. But to completely abrogate this woman of all self-responsibility is ridiculous. So she did this to herself and she's mad at him for it. True to form, Rasputin eventually dismissed her, and according to the article, following his rejection, she had been compelled to lead a dreadful kind of existence in order to obtain a piece of bread. At last, she had become attacked by an awful disease, which had already eaten away a part of her nose and completely disfigured her face. So likely she had syphilis, and she had been being a whore. A disgraced woman like that many times in places throughout history would be reduced to that. That's your only option if you want to survive, is to be a whore. You're not going to go home. Your husband's not going to take you. And, you know, what else have you got? So she became a whore, it sounds like, and got syphilis, and so her face was disfigured. In despair, she decided she had nothing to lose. And the only right thing to do was to try to rid the world of the monster who had caused her such misery. Which, again, if you don't have any self-responsibility, you might really feel that way. Again, I'm not saying what he did was especially right. I'm just saying, like, you also did it. It takes two to tango, bro. She followed Rasputin around St. Petersburg, was never able to get close enough to kill him, but when she heard he was planning to return to his hometown, she saw her opportunity, traveled to Siberia, waited for him on his doorstep, and the rest, they say, is history. But the wound was deep, but not serious. It hadn't punctured any vital organs. And after 7 weeks in the hospital, he recovered. Kind of amazing. Kind of amazing. He insisted the attempt on his life was the work of the devil, who must have inspired her to her abominable actions. He said that at the moment the knife touched him, he saw an angel descend from heaven to stop Guseva's arm and place an angelic hand on the wound to stem the bleeding. You can kind of wonder, if you get this knife in someone's belly and it somehow doesn't hit intestine or organ, that's insane. Actually, you hear this stuff, everyone. Someone gets shot, right? And it goes like right between like their heart and their lung somehow, and like doesn't, you know, like you're like, well, how? And yeah, maybe it was something miraculous. Either way, he didn't die. So that was his first assassination attempt. She was pronounced insane, placed in an asylum. And she's reported to have attempted and failed another assassination attempt on a Russian Orthodox bishop in 1919. So can you trust her? Can you trust her view of Rasputin? Probably not. Probably not. Have you met women who are obsessed with a guy? Like, maybe not the most sane person. The murder of Grigory Rasputin on December 1916, though, was incredibly brutal and deeply shocking. It was led by Prince Felix Yusupov and a group of co-conspirators who decided that enough was enough. I don't know what that means. They're just, yeah, I hate this guy and I'm done hating him, so let's go. Rasputin was endangering the future of the monarchy with his debauched drunkenness. I mean, that doesn't even make sense. It's the same thing. Like, you can't take responsibility for yourself, so you're going to blame this guy. Like, things aren't going well in our society. We're going to blame one man who doesn't even have the power. His lewd exploits and his blatant manipulation of the imperial family's tragedy. I mean, maybe that's all really realistic, but it's just the classic again, can you take responsibility? Is it his fault if the imperial family was like, this is working, you're helping us, come on in? And if that somehow affected them negatively, is that his fault? Is he taking advantage of them? Or is he providing them with something they genuinely needed and appreciated? But yeah, he gets drunk sometimes and he has sex with the ladies, but we'll take it because he's helping. And it's not that evil to just have sex with some ladies who want to have sex, right? Again, you just go either way. You don't like it, cool, I get it. You can easily criticize those things, but to just like say that he's some sort of evil monster and that it's all his fault and none of these other people have anything, he just took advantage and has all this power and they have none, is like pretty ridiculous. But anyways, these guys wanted him dead. So Rasputin was lured by Yusupov to the opulent Moika palace with the promise of a late-night social gathering hosted by Yusupov's wife, Princess Irina, a famed beauty whom Rasputin had always wanted to meet and who happened to be, conveniently, on holiday in Crimea. Dr. Lazovert, a co-conspirator, prepared cakes and wine laced with potassium cyanide, hoping for a swift and silent death. Amazingly, and to their great horror, Rasputin seemed largely unaffected by the poison. And again, it's hard to say, but if you can get stabbed in that way and be fine, right? And then you're eating this poisoned cake and drink and just fine, like, yeah, your mythical status grows, dude. Your legendary status grows. There might be something to this. Desperate that things were not going to plan, Yusupov took a revolver provided by Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, returned to the room, and shot Rasputin multiple times. Even then, Rasputin's resilience proved remarkable. He managed to stagger outside before being shot again by Vladimir Pyotrovich, another conspirator. Finally, to ensure his death, the group bound the still-breathing Rasputin and tossed him into the icy waters of the Neva River, where he ultimately drowned. It's so interesting to me, too. So he survives the poisoning, he survives the stabbing, and then they have to shoot him, just like common criminal thugs. They're reduced to shooting him, which is much more traceable and, whatever. And so maybe they were trying to do this quiet and untraceable, and they didn't get away with that. But they shoot him, and even after they're shooting him multiple times, he's just sort of like stumbling away, like he's getting away. And so then they have to bind him and throw him in the river just in case the multiple gunshots weren't going to finish the job, which at this point, you could understand why they'd imagine that. They're like, is this guy actually magic? Why won't he die? And then they have to tie him up and throw him in the river. What's really interesting is there's many cases of people who were dunked suddenly or fell into or thrown into icy water. And that's actually what saved them from wounds that would have otherwise killed them. So this might be where some of the sort of idea of like, did he even die then? Because you might say, of course he did, he drowned. Dude, there's a story that's a real story that's documented and verifiable of a girl, I think she was like 6 or something, fell into a river, was frozen essentially, and in the water for hours. And she survived. Her brain was like cooled in this way that allowed no brain damage to happen. Her wounds that she had sustained were like didn't bleed out and didn't kill her because the cold like stopped them essentially. Like, because she fell in the river, she survived. She wouldn't have otherwise, but you would have thought, well, that's where you drowned, especially as a child, for 2 hours in the water. No, she lived. So, the idea that perhaps he did survive this is technically tenable. It says, now let's hear from the horse's mouth, so to speak, from the leader of the assassination plot himself, Prince Felix Yusupov. This account is long, she says, but fascinating reading as it's an eyewitness account. He says, at 11 o'clock, everything was in readiness. On the table was the assortment of sweets, the wine and liquor. We had taken up our places, all the people in on it. Took a few pieces of potassium cyanide, sprayed them into a half a dozen small cakes. Later, the wine was also poisoned. The doses administered were enormous, sufficient to kill 10 men. After these preparations, I went in my car to Rasputin's house. Half an hour later, We were sitting together in one of the rooms. He ate and drank, but the poison had no apparent effect on him. The dose taken by him was more than enough to dispatch him to another world had he been an ordinary man. This is from the guy who hates him and set this all up to kill him. He's even admitting, like, this was crazy, right? He appeared to be merely a little more lively, and the more tipsy he became, the more recklessly he quaffed the poisonous liqueurs, cognacs, and wines, one after the other without any effect. The hours dragged on until the waiting became intolerable. We sat opposite each other without saying a word. He looked at me in a queer, penetrating manner as if to say, "You see, all your plans have come to naught." I had never seen him appear more terrible, and in that moment I felt such loathing and hatred toward the man that I could have strangled him without the slightest compunction. Then he rested his head against the table and appeared to fall asleep. Soon he raised his head, however, and demanded tea. After drinking a glass of which he paced up and down the room for a while, the poison still refused to take effect. This dreadful suspense lasted more than 2 hours. I slipped quietly upstairs to my confederates who were waiting patiently for something to happen. When they heard the poison had failed to take effect, they all wanted to scramble downstairs and make an end of Rasputin, but I persuaded them not to do so and assured them that I could manage the task alone. I procured a revolver, proceeded upstairs again, went and sat beside him and asked him how he was feeling. "I have an awful headache," replied Rasputin, "and my stomach is burning. Give me another glass of something to drink. Perhaps that wine will make it better." He drank a glass of Madeira and seemed at once to become much brighter and fresher. It was almost desperate. This Satan, disguised as a human being, would not die. Oh, God. It was this thought that drove me to put an end to the matter. I waited for a good opportunity, went right up to my man, placed my revolver against his body, and pressed the trigger. Rasputin yelled and bellowed like a wounded animal and collapsed on the bearskin rug. The revolver's right on his body, and he shoots him. Oh, my gosh. On hearing the uproar, the Confederates rushed down to the room, saw Rasputin lying there with closed eyes. On his fine silk shirt appeared a round blood stain. For a few minutes, his face still twitched and trembled, and then he became as quiet as the dead. When Dr. Lazavert examined the wound, he found that the bullet had penetrated the region of the heart. There was no doubt about it. Rasputin was dead. Wow. Okay, so he got shot right close range, right up against his chest, through the heart. Says we lifted the body from the rug and laid him on the tile floor. Then I extinguished the light, closed and bolted the window, and we all went upstairs. Our spirits were of the highest, for we believed that this night's work would mean that Russia would be saved from defeat and ignominy. Preparations had to be made for getting rid of Rasputin's body. It must have been a half an hour later that a feeling of uneasiness began to master me. I had an irresistible longing to see the corpse again. I went upstairs, unlocked the dining room door, turned on the light, and Rasputin was lying where we had left him. I stooped over him, and suddenly, to my horror, I saw the man's left eye slowly open. A moment later, the other eye opened too, and both eyes now seemed to be boring into me with the force of primitive, boundless hate. I love this story. I grew numb with horror and wanted to run away for help, but my legs and my voice were no longer under my control. I stood there spellbound as if in a nightmare. I mean, this man hates him, killed him, and has no reason to make him sound good. And I guess maybe he thinks this sounds bad. So maybe he's elaborating and embellishing, to make him seem more like evil and satanic, like he can't be killed. That could definitely be the case. Otherwise, I'm kind of like, why are you bragging for this guy if you hate him so much? Because this is badass. Like, what the hell? And then there occurred something which is absolutely inexplicable. With one bound, Rasputin leapt to his feet. Wow. Foam was coming from his mouth. He was terrible to behold. With the roar of a wild animal, he sprang at me, and his fingers tore at my shoulders and tried to get at my throat. He kept repeating my name, and his voice was full of hatred. I was seized with an indescribable terror. I tried to get away from him, but his hands held me as in a grip of steel. A furious struggle commenced, and this poisoned and bullet-riddled body was something about which to this very day I'm only able to think with shuddering. Finally, after a prolonged and desperate struggle, I saw that my opponent had no more strength. Rasputin fell at last to the ground. Lay there on his back, he made an effort to rise again, upon which I rushed upstairs, crying out to my companions that Rasputin was still alive, and I procured a revolver for the second time. As I glanced back over my shoulder, I saw Rasputin following me upstairs on all fours, snorting and groaning like a wounded beast. What the hell? Upon reaching a door which led to a small back stair and thence to the courtyard, he tore open the door and plunged headlong to his doom. We hurried after this man, against whom we both poison and cartridge had but small effect, and fired several shots in his direction. 3 successive shots must have found their mark, for 3 times he emitted a sharp yell of pain, but he continued to make his way across the courtyard. This man's been shot now, like what, 4 or 5 times? He's been poisoned with the dose to kill 10 men, laid there for hours. It says only after the 4th shot, which pierced him in the neck, did he finally lurch forward on a heap of snow, never to rise again. This time the affair was really at an end. 2 hours later, he was dropped to the bottom of the icy floods of the river Neva. Russia was freed from this unholy monster. Wow. That's intense, man. Oh. So I guess the movie she had mentioned in the first thing, Nicholas and Alexandria, does depict this murder pretty much as described in that description. It says, how did Rasputin survive? Science, stomach acid, and a Siberian grit. It would have failed ordinary men, right? But firstly, it says it's important to realize that Prince Felix might have embellished his account just a touch. His account of that night's event was written in 1922, 6 years later, after the actual murder. Let's face it, an autobiography reads much better when it's about a courageous hero facing a seemingly invincible foe, bent on the destruction of an entire nation. Yes. That's what I was just saying. Like, if you're trying to make him look bad and that sounds like satanic to people and evil and whatnot, then that's definitely what's going on there. She says, there's no doubt, however, that the exact reasons behind Rasputin's 9 lives are still a mystery due to a lack of concrete medical evidence. Nevertheless, here are some explanations that have been offered for his seemingly invincible resilience. Some theories suggest Rasputin might have possessed an unusually high tolerance for poisons due to chronic exposure to small doses over time, either intentionally or through contaminated food or water. It makes sense. He would have been well aware that many wanted him dead and that poison was a convenient murder weapon. So future-proofing his body by taking small amounts of cyanide isn't completely unlikely. Also, Rasputin was a large man in both girth and height, standing 6'4" or 193 centimeters. He hailed from sturdy Siberian peasant stock, likely had a naturally robust physical constitution. Add to this a strong immune system and a high pain threshold. This would have allowed him to endure injuries fatal to others less strong. And that can't really be understated. A lot of people think about peasants as like these, underfed, undernourished, and therefore weak and whatever. But what's actually usually the case is that peasants live closer to the earth, have more of like actual nutritive food throughout their lives, and also do manual labor frequently. And so they're well, built and constituted and, have this sort of strong foundation. So not a bad point. She says psychological factors, an unwavering will to survive, together with extreme religious conviction and a belief that he was a saint protected by God, could have provided him the mental fortitude to overcome physical trauma. That can't be understated. It goes back to that, what we were talking about before, the placebo effect. You genuinely believe that, and you have this impractical will, right? This just crazy will, then yeah, that's going to help you survive anything. She says some even suggest Rasputin might have entered a state of extreme hysteria or dissociation during the attacks, temporarily numbing the pain and delaying the body's response to injuries. Also true, especially if you've been through trauma in your life. You might be really good at that, like some of us are. And then there's the element of sheer luck and the chance that vital organs were just not affected by poison and bullets, giving him some extra lives, in quotes. And yeah, that's the case too, right? Just like the knife just happened to not hit anything. Maybe these bullets just happened to be missing, the main organs. And she said, interestingly, I found an article in an old newspaper that came up with an entirely new theory. In 1934, a professor of internal medicine at Berlin University, a certain Dr. Lesch, published a textbook on toxicology, which explained that the failure of Prince Yusupov to poison Rasputin with potassium cyanide was due to the alcoholic gastritis from which Rasputin allegedly suffered. That's fascinating. So his debauchery actually saved him, perhaps, for the moment. Obviously dead later. According to him, this condition prevented the formation of acid in the stomach upon which cyanide normally acts. That's so amazing. I love that. I love that theory. I'll tell you another thing that I don't think they're going to bring up here is that we already know that it is factually, measurably, repeatedly, shown that especially, monks who have like this very strong ability to control their own heart rate, brain waves, and all of this are very physically embodied and present, can do things like take a vial of acid and not trip. Right? So they're capable of having chemical components come into their body, and then they're such masters of their body that those chemicals don't have to affect them. If they wanted to, it could, or they could just choose for it not to. So that's already known. They can't explain it, science is mystified by it, and so it ignores it and all of that, but it's documented and we know it. So, could he perhaps have something like that as well, that is sort of akin to like the will and the placebo, but is more like, nah, I'm just not going to react to that cyanide, actually. You can do that. I'm not telling you go try it. I'm telling you, don't do things like this at home, but maybe it's another impetus to practice your meditation, right? And increase your presence. Maybe. So she says, what happened to Rasputin's body? Did it remain forever at the bottom of the river? In April 1917, an Australian newspaper claimed that while Rasputin's body was flung into the river, the court later commanded its recovery, and he was buried at someplace, the Tsar's private estate, actually, where it was believed that the spirit was as potent as Rasputin had been in life. The writer continues, at a later date, the provisional government, fearing that the body would become the center of a mischievous cult, ordered it to be dug up and interred in a remote spot. Trustworthy men took the coffin on a motor lorry, but they were caught in a snowdrift, and as they were unable to move the lorry, they decided to cover the coffin with snow and hide it until morning. A party of local militia then arrived, who decided to tear down dead branches and build a bonfire, and in this, Rasputin's body and coffin was consumed. What a story. It sounds like they didn't ever potentially even have the body. So like I said, this makes sense why there are these sort of stories that maybe he survived. The cold of the river could have definitely helped him survive all of that. And if they say they went and got the body, but then, oops, we left it in a snowdrift and then someone just happened to burn it, like that's quite the story to cover. Oh, we couldn't find it, but we don't want you to know, right? Or something like that. So pretty interesting. Again, adding to the myth, adding to the legend. In 1946, an article reported that natives of the Aleutian Islands in the North Pacific believed that Gregory Rasputin was still alive on a lonely Alaskan island, according to a dispatch from Anchorage, Alaska. The writer goes on to say that under an assumed name, Rasputin was guarding the grave of the Russian Greek Orthodox priest Father Herman, who died more than 100 years previous on a small island off the Kodiak. The man reputedly appeared in Kodiak in 1919, 3 years after his alleged assassination. The man was stated to be identical in appearance to Rasputin and apparently refused to answer any questions about his past. That's pretty cool. I love that. I wonder, again, which leads back to this sort of like, oh, if you see the future, why didn't you see that coming? Well, maybe he did. And he was like, cool, I'm out. Bye. See you guys later. Played my part. Time to go. Really interesting character. We also have these ideas that the Green Hand, a secret sort of society, was involved with this. So the AI overview says the Green Hand in relation to Rasputin refers to a rumor, particularly from his killers, that he was a member of a secret society called the Austrian Green Hand, or similar names like Green Hand, manipulating Russia into World War I for German interests. Though this is widely disputed by historians who see it as a slander to justify his assassination and blame him for Russia's problems. So there you go. That exists too. I'm sure that's also been in some popular culture. And there's more than one, right? There was also some other, I think it was just called the Hidden Hand, which I know some people use as a generic term for, the sort of shadow governments of the world and these sorts of secret societies and their influence that they might hold. But I think there was an actual organization. I seem to remember this in history textbooks about World War I and the assassination and starting of the war, and that some sort of hand was involved in that, right? Some sort of group with the word hand in the title. So I don't know, but this is not that hand, different hand. So probably not, right? Like they say, probably just a false accusation. But I stumbled upon this, and we'll end soon. But the absolute sheer enormity of Rasputin's cock is the name of this Reddit post. And he says the average height for a male in Russia in 1920 was 5'5", or wait, 5'5" to 7. Oh, no, okay, 5 foot 5.7 inches. So we're just gonna say 5'6". All right. Now they say it's 5'10", a 6.5% increase. There is a relationship between height and penis length. Therefore, it can be assumed that between 1920 and 2020, the average penis size has also increased by 6.5%. Grigory Rasputin, who died in 1916, had an infamous 13-inch penis, which is now on display in a Russian museum. Is that true? There's no way that's on display in a Russian museum. Using the logic presented earlier, it can be assumed that in today's standards, Rasputin's penis would be nearly 14 inches long. Why? Why would it be 13 inches, but actually 14? Anyway, whatever their logic is. Jonah Flacone currently holds the record for longest erect penis at 13.5 inches long. By the way, it makes his life a living hell. So this is not something you actually want to occur. And I highly doubt Rasputin's penis was that long, but we'll see. We have one more article that alleges to talk about Rasputin's cock. So in conclusion, this post says Grigory Rasputin's flaccid penis would be 14 inches long, also not true, with an erection about 1.5 feet long, making him by far the man with the largest penis ever. I love the insanity of that post. Nothing about that is true, except perhaps if he is actually that tall, and that is he is said to be very tall, right? That maybe he did have above average size penis, and maybe that's why the ladies loved him. Maybe that's why that lady became so infatuated with him that she followed him around and tried to kill him later. That's definitely how women sometimes be. So, murder, height, and where is his penis? Rasputin myths busted, it says. Okay, so we'll skip things we already know. How did he die? Okay. His height was incredibly tall. Apparently, he was officially 6'3", still very tall. Lenin was only 5'4". That's how tall I am. That's pretty. It's kind of short for a guy, for most guys. Doesn't matter. I'm not judging. I'm just saying a lot of guys that's a little bit short. So I didn't know Lenin was a short guy. But again, back then that was a little bit more normal, maybe, so not so short. Tsar Nicholas was 5'5" also. So Rasputin was a foot taller than them. He was aware of his height. Maybe he is descended from Nephilim. That's why he has mystical powers. Legend has it Rasputin's penis is floating in a pickle jar in the Museum of Erotica in St. Petersburg, Russia. However, experts are divided about how legit it is. It's not scientifically proven to be his. It is over 11.8 inches long. So yeah, that's a large. If that's how it is, flaccid. Man, yeah. Still not the 1.5 feet the Reddit post claimed, when it was fully erect, but maybe, I guess it's like technically possible. It was allegedly sold to the museum in 1977 by Rasputin's lion tamer daughter. What? Why would you carry your father's penis in a jar, dude? Like, what? Okay. That's creepier than anything else that has happened in this story so far, is that perhaps your daughter found your body, cut your dick off, and then carried around with her for 50 years before selling it to a museum. Why would you do that? I mean, maybe now, this is the first time where I'm like, maybe these guys are into black magic, because that's bizarre. Oh my God. I am sure that's not his real penis, and that, it's just a fun thing that people like to talk about, his dick. But I had no idea until doing this show that anybody wanted to talk about his penis. But definitely he's probably not in a jar. I like the idea that he survived and went to Alaska to that monk's or saint's grave. I like that idea. I'm going with that. That's what I think happened. So yes. Oh, And we already had all this. So that was it. That was the end of the show. Talking about penises is how we're going to end this show with Rasputin. But yeah, my intuition is that he was a pretty intelligent person who did have a very mystical series of experiences and lives, which you could call awakening and more. And that he did understand how to help people experience healing and relief. And that is something that people really need. Whether you think that therefore it's fake for some reason, or you think that therefore he's gifted for some reason, either way, you're providing people with something they need. And to say like, oh, they're just vulnerable and so you're preying on them is also missing the point that when you're vulnerable, you need someone. Like usually when you're vulnerable, you need someone who will come in and soothe you, help you be soothed and protected and safe and get back to some sort of center and balance. And there's nothing wrong with being the person who does that, right? It sounds like he was not necessarily made like especially rich and, he was indulgent. But here's the thing I think about too. If you grew up as a peasant and you worked really hard for everything and you did all these pilgrimages, and now there's these people who love you so much and they want you to live in their house with them and they're opulent as I'll get up, and then you get to have things like cakes and alcohol and whatever. Would you not enjoy to indulge in that for a time? And there's the ascetic sort of like monk, like, idea that you should reject all the things of the flesh and you should not get lost in them and, not be too indulgent in them. And some spiritual traditions go that directions and others go the other direction where it's like, no, you should enjoy being alive. You should connect that enjoyment with the awe and wonder and the miracle of being alive. You should appreciate it, right? You should be in celebration of it, that it is, the product of a miraculous life that you get to live in general, but you shouldn't avoid it, right? And so being indulgent is not necessarily anti-spiritual. And so, yeah, wouldn't you maybe want to, if you had lived a life of perhaps some sort of deprivation, and now you had access to that you might like enjoy that. The other thing too is like, all the people who are around him and who loved him and wanted to, whatever. I'm just considering that perhaps he gave them perspective that they had never encountered before. And that's also very worthy. And again, it doesn't, until I got to the part where his daughter's carrying around a penis potentially, like there's nothing really dark about this story. It's a guy who seems very religiously, spiritually convicted, is able to give people comfort and perhaps also heal them or help them heal themselves, which is what is actually happening when you're doing healing work. And then he gets some reward for that. But that like the turmoil of the time is just like pinned on him, which is very convenient. It's very convenient to be able to look at the newcomer or the person who's different and be like, that's the reason for all of our ills. It's not us. We couldn't possibly be bad. We couldn't possibly have led to our own destruction in any way. This is not us. It's that guy. So let's kill him. And that's kind of the story of most mystics and most healers and most sort of spiritual leaders. Maybe not most, but a good number of them. You've got the always the potential that you will be the one that takes the brunt of the blame for whatever happens to go on. So I see all of that in his story, and I hope he did live. I hope he lived. I hope he had the fortitude, the strength, the willpower, the conviction, the perhaps angelic intervention, and the coldness of the river all just came together to heal him or keep him alive. And that he escaped to Alaska and he got to live out this life in a maybe very different way. He was the hermit, right, in the hills. So I love that. I'll maybe do some dream programs on it, see what I get from the channels. Maybe I'll do a little post on it if anything comes up around that I can share. From those sorts of levels of intuition and insight and knowing. And if you'd like to learn how to do that sort of work yourself, you should absolutely join me for Dream Walking this February. Go to the site at roguesoul.org and go to the shop and click on Dream Walking. Remember, if you are on my Substack or you are on my email list or both, you got the coupon code that can give you a big discount for that class. So I would love to dream walk with you, empower you to be able to do all of that mystical work yourself. And until then, Travel well, aim for balance, and always look inside first.
Glued to these screens, it's a plot to drop the IQ. Fighting amongst each other over rumors that don't like you. Prefer us trapped in melancholy with the wood wands of holly. Suggestions that obliterate to camouflage the folly. Attempted mental robbery, executed sloppily. Hypocrisy, this mockery, and walk the talk with me. Put the hands up to touch the Akasha, cause you know deep down there's something bigger than